Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Daily Journal's Capitol View webcast. Each Monday afternoon, we talk about the latest in Mississippi politics with Daily Journal Capitol correspondent, Capitol Bureau Chief Bobby Harrison, and we are joined again by Bobby today. Bobby, what's going on in Jackson today?
It's good that I'm here. Huh? Yeah, I mean, everything's going well. A little fall weather, so we're dealing with that and getting ready for the holiday season.
Yeah, we were talking in our budget, morning budget meeting this morning. They've already got the decorations out at Ballard Park in Tupelo, which really floored me when I saw them last Thursday. It's not even Halloween yet, and they're already decorating for Christmas. But
shouldn't zoom right past Halloween. I mean, that's Halloween's such a fun time for kids.
Yeah,
and adults too, I guess. Yeah,
I guess it takes a while to put all the lights up, but I was. My 5-year-old, when I was dropping off at school this morning, asked me why Santa Claus was already in the park, and I did not have an answer for him. So anyway, I guess we'll start off talking today about I guess a surprise announcement last week. You had covered last spring a really dramatic announcement by State Representative Steve Holland, a Democrat from Plantersville. Has been in the House. I guess when this current term finishes, he'll be at 36 years, and he announced in a speech on the House floor that he was going to retire at the end of that term. And he may be changing his mind now. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Times change. You had to, especially with Steve Holland, you had to really keep up with it. But Steve Holland, everybody knows, is a colorful state House member, Democrat from Plantersville, represents parts of Tupelo and other parts of Lee County. And he announced, as you said, in a dramatic speech on the House floor earlier this year when the legislature was in session, that he had been diagnosed with dementia and was going to retire at the end of this term and not run for re-election in 2019. But he was at an event this past week, I think last Tuesday night, I believe. It was an event put on by Y'all Politics, which is a conservative-leaning political blog in Mississippi, and they do top 50 people of great influence. They do that. It's the second year for them to do it, and they had a banquet. And as part of that banquet, they also induct two politicians into its Hall of Fame. The first year it was William Winter and Thad Cochran, which I think by anybody's estimation would be two good candidates to start off with what they meant to Mississippi. And this year it was Steve Holland and former Governor Haley Barbour. And then Holland did his typical fun-loving speech. So he interjects some humor and some philosophy and some Southern philosophy, and some politics. But as part of that, he announced that he was misdiagnosed and he was thinking seriously about running again. I think the quote was 36 years is a good round number. 40 sounds better. And he pretty much indicated that he was seriously considering running for re-election. And if I had to guess, I would say that he probably would run for re-election. Now, he didn't go into great details, but from what I've been able to piece together through some time, Steve was diagnosed. He was having some issues back during the legislative session that led to the diagnosis. But what it was not taken into account, I think, maybe by some people, maybe some medical professionals, that he, in 2016, Steve had some issues, some health issues.
Surgeries, right? And I'm going to stop real quick because you might have said it and I missed it, but the diagnosis he's talking about is dementia that he'd been diagnosed with. And he was misdiagnosed with.
I think I said that, but maybe I need to be diagnosed too. But at any rate, he had those health issues in 2016. It included some, I think, perhaps maybe even a stroke. And that might have led to the diagnosis that the issues that he was suffering for a while in 2017, but those issues appear to be short-lived. And he argues that he is as mentally healthy as he's ever been. And you hear him speak. It's hard to dispute that. You may disagree with what he says, but it's hard to argue with his ability to say it. So right now it appears that he's leaning towards running for re-election in 2019.
Bobby, take me to kind of what went through your mind as you hear that announcement. as you said, Steve Holland is known as a colorful speaker, and is often joking. For anyone who's heard him speak publicly, and I know even a lot of times on the floor of the legislature. Did you wonder if he's joking at first? Did you kind of have to talk to him afterwards and say, like, is that for real? Is that a joke? I mean, kind of, what was that moment like? Had you heard whispers of that before? Did it catch you off guard?
Well, you talk about
what happened
when he made the announcement on the floor?
No, the announcement. I'm sorry, on last week, Tuesday or Wednesday, whatever, at the Hall of Fame.
Well, he had. I talked to him earlier, and he'd pretty much said that he felt that he was misdiagnosed, and there were some thoughts that maybe the health issues he suffered in 2016, which, those health issues were life-threatening. He missed a good portion of the 2016 session because of those health issues. And I think, that this has been ongoing for a couple of months, that maybe he felt that he had recovered and that mentally he was sharp. He's working, he's an undertaker, he owns a funeral home, and he's working full time, staying busy. And I think he just feels that he still wants to be involved in the political process, and he feels that he's capable of doing that. I think so. I wasn't expecting this. I didn't know he was going to say that Tuesday night, but I'd been waiting. I'd been expecting for quite a while that this day was going to come sooner or later, where he changed his mind and said that he was considering running for re-election.
Yeah, was there, I also couldn't help but wonder, what the reaction of the room was, and part of what I was wondering is, people have honored him so much on his retirement, and I would guess that it was some of the momentum, from the retirement, as far as being named to the Hall of Fame, I'm sure had to do with him, being on his way out and kind of looking at his legacy and career. You're less likely to put someone in a Hall of Fame when they're still actively serving. Was there a sense of that, people kind of, I don't know if not disappointed wouldn't be the right word, but kind of feeling like, hey, we've kind of given you the victory tour, but a little bit too early?
Well, perhaps. I didn't actually hear that in the room, but that's an interesting thought, and that's a good question. No one in the room said that. The Y'all Politics folks didn't say anything like that. I think they were actually
glad he's doing well, obviously.
Yeah, I think they were actually, kind of excited that some news was made at their event. And go back to last year, you can make the same argument, about, I'm not saying that Steve Holland's on the level of a Thad Cochran, but in some way in state politics he is, but they're two completely different personalities. But Cochran is still in the U.S. Senate, and he was placed in the Hall of Fame too.
Okay.
And, so there's maybe a sense that that Cochran is in his final term, and I guess you can make the case that they thought maybe Holland was in his final term too. But and who knows? He may well be. He may decide not to run, or he may decide to. Nothing in politics is is certain. He may run and get beat up. Even though he hadn't had a serious contender in a long time. This could happen in 2019, but I didn't sense that disappointment you're talking about. I think that Holland, Holland is in so many ways is such a unique figure in Mississippi politics. He just represents one small house district up in northeast Mississippi, but he's probably as well known a legislator as it is in the state. Because he's been around for so long. He's a colorful figure. He says stuff that gets him gets him in trouble. Sometimes he says controversial stuff that that a lot of people think a lot of his friends say, I wish he hadn't said that. But then at the same token, it's hard for the opposition to stay mad at Holland, because he is he in so many ways he is such a big figure and larger than life and colorful and people just kind of gravitate to him. So he's kind of with Holland you get the good and the bad, and I think people in political circles anyway have come to respect that and to accept that. And I think you could say the same thing about his district up in northeast Mississippi. They know who he is. They know he is colorful and sometimes controversial, but they feel he's their representative, and continually send him back down here to represent them in the Mississippi House.
Yeah, sure. And there's no question about his passion and that, he's always, fighting hard.
Wears passion on his sleeve, and sometimes that gets him in trouble. But at the same time, that's what endears him to many people, both on the, in his party and the opposition party as well.
Yeah, and that was even clear in some of the comments. He was honored along with Haley Barbour. Those were the two Hall of Fame inductees who were obviously from opposite political parties, but talked a lot about their respect for each other. And the need to return to civility and whatnot. And, part of that I thought was interesting, Bobby. Then I guess kind of one more thing I want to ask you about on this topic before moving on is I did not know that Steve Holland used to be a Republican. And, it's interesting, I guess, in this age in state politics, you see a lot of people that were maybe legacy Democrats from the time when the state was, only Democratic Party, and it's particularly at the state level and local level, and more switches to the Republican Party. You probably don't see as many going from the Republican to the Democratic Party. What do you remember when that happened? Do you know the background of that?
No, well, I mean, he was, I did a profile on Holland years ago, and I remember a good bit of it. I mean, he became active in the Republican Party while in college and at Mississippi State, and was, and became real active, and was active on the state level. At the time, former Governor Barbour was in the late 70s or early 80s was the executive director of the state Republican Party. Granted, it was a much smaller party than it is now in Mississippi, but and Steve was close to Governor Barbour. That they worked together on party issues, and Holland credits Barbour for convincing him to run for the House district the first time. He ran as a Republican, and he lost that election. He jokes that it was even hard. He couldn't even get his mother hardly to vote for him because he was running as a Republican. And he came back 4 years later, changed parties, and ran as a Democrat and won. And he's been in the an influential member of the House almost since he got down here. And it's funny, he was you hear stories, you might think, well, he's a conservative Democrat, but he would argue himself that he's not a conservative Democrat. He's a progressive Democrat. He's one of the leading voices of the Democratic Party in the Mississippi legislature, but it's a fact he did start his political career as a Republican, and he even for a period served as when former Governor Barbour was injured in a plane crash. Holland served as the interim executive director of the Republican Party for a short period of time, and as Holland pointed out Tuesday night, it was a period of time that was important for the Mississippi Republican Party, because there was a sort of internal battle at the time going on between the moderate wing of the party and the conservative wing of the party. So he played a key role in that, back in the early 80s, I guess it was, or late 70s, somewhere right around 1980.
Yeah, interesting. I had never known that fact about Steve Holland until seeing your story from last week. So I was kind of curious about that. Bobby, I guess the other big news story of last week was the Mississippi Supreme Court ruling on former Governor Ronnie Musgrove's lawsuit related to the state funding, public school funding formula, the Mississippi Adequate Education Program. Musgrove essentially was suing on behalf of 21 school districts for two things. One was to say that the legislature had to fully fund MAEP going forward, and was also trying to recoup for those 21 districts the $235 million they had not been funded since 2008. The Supreme Court did not side with him, but basically ruled that the legislature was not mandated to fully fund the formula. And this is all based on a 2006 law. And tell us a little bit more about it and their decision.
Yeah, the 2006 law said the legislature shall fully fund the MAEP, essentially going forward from 2007 on, or something to those effects. But, it was clear that the law said, matter of factly, the MAEP shall be fully funded. And of course, the Mississippi Adequate Education Program is the state mechanism used to provide for the basic operation of local school districts. And I mean, Musgrove himself didn't expect to win that lawsuit. It would have been a, huge, major thing if he had won the lawsuit. But, you know, you had to, the Supreme Court was looking for ways to rule against former Governor Musgrove, who was, by the way, was sort of instrumental in enacting the MAEP funding formula in 1997 when he was lieutenant governor. But the Supreme Court had some interesting arguments in their decision not to rule on former Governor Musgrove's side. The most interesting, I think, of those was four of the justices ruled that essentially said that, you know, each year you pass an appropriations bill, and essentially said that appropriations bill would actually put money in the MAEP formula would sort of trump the general law. And, you know, any, you know, first year legislator, you know, when a backbench freshman realizes that, you know, the Constitution says specifically that you can't make general law an appropriations bill. You make general law and then you use the appropriations bill to fund that general law. You don't change the general law through the appropriations bill. But the four Supreme Court justices essentially said it was okay to do that, which is kind of, you know, four is not a majority, but it kind of, you know, based on that, I'm not sure how that's going to affect the legislative process going forward, because, you know, every year as they, you know, they pass the bills to fund Department of Education, the local school districts, universities and colleges, you know, every agency in state government, you know, they make a point of saying you cannot make general law in these appropriations bills. You have to base the budget on what the general law says. But the Supreme Court, at least 40 members, said something different. The majority, what they said in ruling against the ruling against Musgrove was that, well, the legislature did say you had to fully fund MAEP, or shall fully fund MAEP each year, but the governor may think otherwise. So you know, so the legislature can't be held to that standard, because the governor may say, I don't want to fully fund MAEP. Well, I mean, that was kind of an interesting argument, because, you know, when the 2006 law was passed, it was signed into law by, you know, Governor Haley Barbour, and, you know, because, you know, everybody knows the governor has to sign a bill before it becomes law, or it takes a 2/3 majority to override the governor's veto, and so the governor had signed off on that. Now, you know what, you know, in simple terms, what would, you know, happen if the legislature don't want to fund, you know, wants to remove that law, or the governor wants to remove that law that says that legislature shall fully fund MAEP, is the legislature and the governor would pass a new law. But they didn't do that. Instead, they just ignored the 2006 law, which kind of, you know, begs the question if, you know, does the legislature have to obey any law? Or, so we'll see going forward what that Supreme Court decision leads to.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you, talking about going forward, and specifically kind of going forward now for the school funding law. There's been a couple of efforts in recent years. There was the initiative, the ballot initiative. I guess it was back in 2015. Was it 2015? Yeah, I guess 2015 was the last statewide election. The ballot initiative that would have required constitutional amendment that would have required full funding of MA, or of whatever the formula was at the time. And then there was this lawsuit by Ronnie Musgrove, both efforts to try to force the funding, which has, you know, only been fully funded twice since it has been enacted in the early 2000s. And so they've both fallen short. What happens now, I guess, for the advocates of more funding for public schools?
Well, I mean, you know, there's a legislative battle every year about how much money is going to go to MAEP, and those battles will continue on a yearly basis. And as you said, it hadn't been fully funded, but only twice. And, you know, nobody is, you know, with especially the revenue shortfalls that have been ongoing for the past few years, you know, there's no expectation it's going to be fully funded anytime soon. And, you know, the key thing to remember, Chris, is everybody talks about how MAEP is such an expense to the state. If it was fully funded any one year, the amount of funding it would take to keep it fully funded each year after that is really minimal. I mean, we're talking about you know, a small amount of state money once you get it fully funded. The trick now is, you know, that it's gotten so far behind full funding, about rough number is about $200 million now, that it is difficult to get back to full funding. And you know, I think Musgrove, or the advocates of full funding, would have been happy with a Supreme Court ruling that said, you know, we're not saying that the legislature has to fully fund MAP based on that law, because, you know, we understand the financial restraints the state is in, But by the same token, there is a law, and there needs to be work to phase in full funding over a period of time. And that would have been I think the best hope that the advocates of full funding could have gotten from the 2015 initiative or from the Musgrove lawsuit. But now, I mean, I expect it's just going to continue being, around 200 million or more underfunded each year. And another point I was going to make: if it was fully funded, Mississippi would still be near the bottom in per pupil expenditures in education. It's not like if it was fully funded, all of a sudden we'd be near the top in per pupil expenditures. We'd still be near the bottom. But there's some school districts that say the fact that MAP is underfunded is preventing us from doing certain things that we need to do to have a quality school district, as far as advanced classes and those types of things.
Sure. And Bobby, there was an effort last year, and we've talked about it a lot, led by Lieutenant Governor Tate Reeves and House Speaker Philip Gunn, to look at changing the school funding formula. They brought in the Ed Build company from New Jersey and got recommendations, and never were able to build consensus. And I know you wrote not too long ago that they're still kind of working on that effort. But I also understand that, at least from the outside, it seemed that part of the impetus to that effort was to give the legislature a little bit more authority, I guess, and to not be tied as much to a formula, but have a little more flexibility year to year. Based on this Supreme Court ruling, do you think that maybe takes away some of the incentive for them to change the formula, and that maybe that ruling kind of already gives them that mandate? Does this change that effort at all, do you think?
Well, I mean, I think it could. I mean, I think the biggest hindrance to that effort was the fact that the legislature, didn't have additional money to put into education, to put into a new formula. So if you change the formula, there's going to be, but use the same amount of money, there's going to be some school districts that win and some school districts that lose. And I think that was the thing that was, keeping a lot of legislators from voting for a new formula, because it might mean less money for their school district. But I do think there were some things in the Ed Bill proposal that would be a benefit to the state. But the fact of the matter is, until there's more money to put into the formula, whatever formula there is, legislators are going to be reluctant to vote for it, because they don't want to vote for a new formula that means less money for their school district. It's hard to go home and to defend that to the teachers, to the parents, and the students. So I think that's the biggest issue preventing a new formula, is there's just not enough money to put additional money into it. When the MAEP was passed in 1997, there's near unanimous agreement in the education circles that the MAEP would be good for education. And the reason there was near unanimous agreement is they were putting $130 million more into education, which back then was it's a lot of money now, but it was a lot more money back in 1997. So every school district received more money, but under the Ed Bill proposal, there's going to be school districts that receive less money unless there's some changes made, and there's and then the legislature comes up with more money to put into education.
Yeah, right. I know that's obviously been a big issue for a long time, and so I don't know, like you said, what happens next. It's been a debate. I'm sure it will continue to be a debate on public school funding. Bobby, one more issue before we let you go. I guess a Northeast Mississippian was named to the State Board of Education late last week. Sean Suggs of Saltillo, who is the vice president of manufacturing for Toyota Mississippi, was appointed by House Speaker Philip Gunn to the 9-member board. Tell us a little bit about him and that appointment.
Well, he had, he's like me. His kids are out of school now, but he had kids in the public school system. So I think he understands the importance of the public school system, especially in his job as, of overseeing one of Mississippi's premier manufacturing plants. And so I think he'll be a big addition to the State Board of Education. In recent years, the State Board of Education has not, there's been efforts by some of the legislature to kind of dilute some of the strength of the State Board of Education. So I think someone like Sean Suggs can provide a little more gravitas, if you will, to the State Board of Education to going forward. And I think that would be, I think it's important to have a strong Board of Education overseeing the local school district. So I think his appointment will help with that effort.
Yeah, one thing I thought was interesting about that appointment, you hear a lot now, one of the biggest trends I feel like in education is really focusing on preparing students for college and careers and for the workforce and for, what they are doing after school and, after they graduate from school. You see that here in Tupelo with events like the Imagine Possibilities Career Expo and just, different initiatives going on in the schools. Philip Gunn, in his comments about why he chose Sean Suggs for the board, talked about specifically his knowledge of workforce development. And, at Toyota, they've been involved here in a lot of those projects. They are the, primary sponsor of Imagine Possibilities, for instance. So, it did kind of, I thought, show something and having someone with that expertise in such a key area for them and putting him on the school board, should really bring a lot to that board, I would think.
Yeah. The board's only been around since, it's a long time now, but, in relative terms, it's one of the newer boards, back in, before the constitutional amendment setting up the State Board of Education, you had a superintendent and I think the attorney general and the governor, maybe, I can't remember, but it was a 3-member board and they were elected officials who had other duties, if you will, but in the mid '80s, the Constitution a provision was included in the Constitution to create what they used to call the Lay Board of Education, and it was supposed to be lay leaders, business people, people from the community who were appointed to sort of oversee the state's local school districts. There's one teacher supposed to be on the board and one school administrator supposed to be on the board, but everybody else on the board is supposed to be from the sort of the non-education fields, but have an interest in a strong public education system. And I think Suggs fits into that. I think he really carries on that tradition. That was, it's interestingly, the late Jack Reed Sr. was instrumental in getting this current State Board of Education established. So it's nice that someone from Lee County is on the board.
Yeah, sure. He obviously still faces Senate confirmation in the 2018 session. I would expect that to be pretty easy. I wouldn't expect to see any issues with the confirmation process. At least
no,
right?
Right, but they do a thorough. They have the peer committee, the legislative oversight committee does a thorough background check on all the nominees, and so he'll undergo that. But I'd be surprised if there's any opposition to him.
Sure.
And interestingly, Chris, the State Board of Education is one of the most powerful, but one of the premier boards in the state. There's boards. There's probably more than 100 boards overseeing all sorts of state agencies. But the State Board of Education, Department of Health, and of course the College Board are maybe the 3 best known. And they oversee the most amount of money, if you will, and had the greatest responsibility. But of all those boards, though, the State Board of Education is one of the few, if not the only one, where the Speaker has an appointment, has 2 appointments. So the Governor has 5, the Lieutenant Governor has 2, and the Speaker has 2. And just sort of a side note, maybe there may be some political science nerd out there interested in that. It's traditionally the Speaker who is from the legislative branch, could not make an appointment to an executive branch board because that's separation of powers. So the Speaker can't make normally can't make appointments to state boards. That's left to the Governor and to the Lieutenant Governor who are in the executive branch. But the only reason the Speaker can make this appointment is because it was incorporated into the Constitution that the Speaker has these 2 appointments. So that's one of the duties the Speaker has that he wouldn't normally have, except for the fact that it's spelled out in the Constitution.
Sure, well, that is interesting. A bit of political science trivia from Bobby
Yeah.
Harrison. Thanks, Bobby.
Yeah.
Well, that does it all. That does it for another episode of Capitol View. We thank you for joining us and remind you that you can catch us each Monday at 2 o'clock live at djournal.com. The replay is also available there or on the Daily Journal's Facebook page. So thanks again, and we will see you next week.